What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. Chris, we have made it. 30 games that the Cavs have won. They're the first team to 30. They were the first team to a lot of different accolades this season, but this is a different kind of milestone. Before this season, last year, it took them until February 1st to get their 30th win of the year. That is before they went on a 9-game win streak of their own. But when you talk about the Cavs coming back and being in a little bit of a fight against the undermanned Dallas Mavericks, where they came away with a 134-122 win, this is their 9th straight game that they've won, and they've won all of those games by 10 or more points. It's just the second time in Cavs franchise history that they have been able to accomplish that kind of feat. I know we keep talking about it being a historic season, Chris. Do you think that's ever going to get old?
No, I don't think so. And I think it's just going to keep coming, Ethan, because I think there are going to be a lot of firsts that are still coming for this team. It could be the first time for Evan Mobley as an all-star. They have a chance to top their franchise mark for consecutive wins against Western Conference opponents, depending on what happens against the Oklahoma City Thunder this coming week. So there's just like a bunch of different things that are going to happen throughout the season. When you're this level of a team, and the Cavs have shown themselves to be really, really, really good. When you're this level of a team, you accomplish all these firsts. You break all these records. And I think there are just more coming for the Cavs.
And this was another showcase game, but it was their end of the road trip that so many thought was going to be a test for the Cleveland Cavaliers. They walked away with a sleep. Mr. Cavalier in the post game was sweeping the floor with the broom. It was a great showcase of what the Cavs are capable of. And Chris, I think you said it very well on a previous podcast. The Cavs are no longer being tested by other teams. They are the test. And when you look at this past 4-game road trip when they went 4-0, they averaged 129.5 points per game, 33.8 assists per game, just 11 and a half turnovers per game, 50.9% from the field, 40.9% from three-point range, and a plus 14 point per game differential. When you talk about everything that they've been able to accomplish, that stands out against the Western Conference. They're 10-0 against the West as well. And they're now an NBA best 30-4 on the season. Cleveland is just the 11th team in NBA history to start a season 30-4 or better, and the first to do so since the 2015-2016 Golden State Warriors, who started 32-2. So when you talk about what this Cavs team has been able to do, and obviously this was an Evan Mobley game. He scored 34 points, and we're going to get into the stats behind that. But Chris, what did you take away from this game besides Evan Mobley's dominance?
Yeah, the big thing that stands out to me, Ethan, is just the margin for error that opponents have against the Cavs. And it's the same feeling that I'm sure opponents had against the dynastic Golden State Warriors, against the Cavs that went to the 4 straight finals during the LeBron James era, the Big Three era of LeBron, Kyrie, Kevin Love. I'm sure it's how teams felt about playing against the Celtics last year. Look, Dallas didn't have Luka, they didn't have Kyrie, they didn't have Najee Marshall. So they were going to have an uphill battle from the very beginning of this game. But if you have 1 bad minute against the Cavs, if you have 2 bad minutes against the Cavs, the game could be blown open just like that. It took them 2 minutes and 58 seconds tonight against the Mavericks to go on a 20-0 run and change what was a competitive game into a complete laugher. And it was basically double digits the rest of the way until the end of bench Mavericks got it down to 9 against the end of bench Cavs. So that's the margin for error. JJ Redick said it during this road trip. You have to play essentially a perfect game of basketball against the Cavs to have a fighting chance to beat them. Staying competitive against them is very, very difficult for any opponent. And if you have 1 bad quarter, if you have 1 bad stretch in that quarter, if you have 1 bad 2-minute stretch, game over, basically. And I think the thing that stands out to me the most about the Cavs just being around during this road trip is they have fun. It's a loose environment. They like each other. They crack jokes. They're singing in the locker room, all those different things. But they understand how to turn it on. They understand there's a maturity to this team that coincides with the fun that they like to have. And when you have both, you have that business-like demeanor that they show on this road trip with the attention to detail, with the focus, with the right mindset going into these basketball games. This was the last game of a road trip, more than 4,000 miles traveled, 3 time zones, 4 games, 4 cities, 9 days. It was drawn out a little bit longer than what the Cavs wanted. Like everybody just wanted to go home after Los Angeles. They did. Celebrate the new year, go home. But they had to stay here a couple of extra days in Dallas. They got their work in off the floor, and they came into the final game of the road trip with a business-like attitude. It wasn't a situation of, oh, they don't have Kyrie, they don't have Luka, we can let our guard down. No, there is a maturity to this team, and there's like, they are obsessed with winning. And they are willing to do whatever it takes and make whatever sacrifices required in order to get the win on that given night. So yeah, this team likes to have fun. Yeah, you can see the joy that they play with. They celebrate threes. They talk a lot of trash. Jared Allen pounds his chest after big plays. But there's a maturity to this team as well, and there's a business-like approach to this team. And they took that tonight against the Mavericks.
Speaking of that 20-0 run, Chris, I mean, I think the most notable thing about it was most of that time period came with Donovan Mitchell on the bench.
Yep.
And the Cavs have created an environment where, especially after last season, where in game 6, I think it was, of the Orlando Magic series, where Donovan scored 50 of the Cavs, like probably 90 points or whatever it was, like maybe even less than that. Like, they have created an environment where they're not solely relying on Donovan for their success. And it has led to not only the confidence growing in everybody on the team and showcasing what they've been able to do, double-digit victories in their last 9 games, but I think it just continues to add on to the layer of depth and what they're able to do with anybody on the floor. And obviously today's game was a little bit different because the rotations were changed up a little bit because of Darius Garland getting, I don't want to say
nuts.
hit. Yep, there you go. That's exactly how you put it.
I kept trying to dance around it in the locker room and ask Darius about it because, Serena Winters was in there. And I said, Darius, there's a lady present. And everybody was like, Chris, shut up. Just say the word. Just say the phrase. Ask me the question that you want to ask me. I said, okay, did you get elbowed in the nuts? Yes, he got elbowed in the nuts. I couldn't tell from my seat courtside if he got a basketball to the nuts or if he got elbowed in the nuts. And he made it clear that it was an elbow. So yes, the rotations were a little bit funky because of that, because Darius had to go off the floor. And he was still kind of like hunched over throughout the first quarter and the first half. Honestly, he was in discomfort for the entire first half of the game. And yeah, the rotations got thrown out the window a little bit because of that. At the same time, Ethan, this goes hand in hand with the big picture plan that the Cavs have to make sure that Donovan is ready for the postseason when it comes around, mentally and physically. They want him to be in the best shape that he can possibly be in, because he wasn't. He wasn't last year. And a big part of that is, the number of minutes that he played throughout the course of the regular season. And I asked Kenny Atkinson before the game tonight, I said, if you had your way, what's the number? What's the number for Donovan on a given night? And Kenny said there isn't a specific number, but it's clear that they want to keep him around 30, as close to 30 as they possibly can. And when they're continuing to blow these teams out, when they're continuing to allow their bench to separate, maintain, whatever the case may be, the Cavs are going to benefit from that greatly. And I think part of the reason why Donovan doesn't have to do as much of the heavy lifting this year, Ethan, Yeah, it's the bench. Yeah, it's the depth on this team. Yeah, it's Darius Garland playing again at an all-star level. But it's the evolution of Evan Mobley. Like, that is the player that has changed the trajectory of this franchise. And this was expected. I don't know if it was expected this year specifically. I think the Cavs were always going to let Evan develop at his own pace, and development is never a linear thing. But Darius even said, like, eventually we were going to have to get to a point with this organization where Evan was the one that took us over the top. And you're seeing Evan become the player that can take us over the top.
And Chris, before I continue and add on to that, I want to just clean up what I said earlier about the Orlando Magic series in the first round of last playoffs, which was Cleveland and Orlando, which ended with a 103-96 finish. And Donovan Mitchell had 50 points in that contest. So he had more than half of the points in that game. So you see how much further the Cavs have come. And in today's game, Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell combined for 31 points. 34 points came from Evan Mobley. So, and just to go off of that, and you mentioned the importance of minute allocation and being able to have Donovan Mitchell ready and at his full strength for the playoffs. I mean, nobody for the Cavs played over 30 minutes or 30 minutes period in tonight's matchup, right? The most was Evan Mobley, who played 29 minutes and 30 seconds. And then when you look at Donovan Mitchell, he played nearly 27 minutes. And that's as close as it really got, other than Darius Garland playing 28-5. So I think it's interesting when you talk about that and how Kenny Atkinson, and as he mentioned to us earlier on into the season, they've had a plan since like 2 weeks into training camp about what they wanted to do with this team when it came to rest, when it came to minute allocation and all those important things. And as you mentioned, Chris, one of the most important is Evan Mobley. And tonight was another game where he just went off. 34 points. This was Evan's second 30 or more point game of the season. He had 4 in his first 3 seasons. Then you talk about how he has scored over 20 points 46 times in his career. 14 of those have come in the first 34 games of this season. And he also has 6 games with at least 3 threes made. 5 of those have come in the last month. So, Chris, when you talk about the evolution, and I had to tweet something out during the game today when there was a sequence which had Evan Mobley come back on a mid-range shot with the shot clock going down, hit the mid-range with a defender in his face. Dean Wade then comes back the next possession, hits a 3, and then the very following possession, Evan Mobley hits a 3 of his own. I think that's something that the Cavs were not expecting this season to be a regular occurrence, but something that they could also lean on. What do you think was the most impressive portion of Evan Mobley's game tonight when it comes to his all-around performance?
The force that he played with, the understanding that he had an advantage, the understanding that he was not going to allow himself to have anything but one of these kinds of games. He was aggressive. He was demanding the ball. He was working for position inside. He was hunting rebounds, getting second chance opportunities, raising his arm and calling for the ball. All those different things. There's a level of confidence that he's playing with. There's a level of decisiveness that he's playing with. And everybody said the same term: Karis LeVert, Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell. There's an aggression to this version of Evan Mobley. There was one moment in the game where he drove into the basket. He put his shoulder into Daniel Gafford. He moved him, just displaced him, and then he finished. And then there was another moment throughout the game where Donovan and Evan ran this little 2-man action, and it's a set that Donovan runs with Darius Garland. So, like, you saw the force, and you saw the physicality, and you saw the growth there, but you also saw him doing guard-like things that make him such a unique player. His ability to handle out on the perimeter, his ability to drive off the dribble. Like I said, the ability to run a 2-man game with Donovan Mitchell that is intended for 2 guards, not a guard and a big. Like, those kinds of things make Evan special. But so many people have been calling for him to be more aggressive, be more demonstrative, be more forceful, be more physical. And you're starting to see somebody that is tapping into that. And no longer is Evan Mobley getting pushed around physically. He's doing the pushing around. And obviously, Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford, they're not Jokic. They're certainly not Joel Embiid. They're different in stature, but Evan recognized that he had a physical advantage in tonight's game, and he continued to capitalize on that, and he continued to exploit that.
The other thing I want to mention this really quickly before we move on further into the Evan Mobley conversation. We talked about the minutes that were played for the Cavs tonight. Looking across the NBA, of course, we got to talk about the New York Knicks, who are also playing really, really well. They had the task of playing against the OKC Thunder, who came back in the fourth quarter, scoring 37 points and allowing just 19 in the fourth quarter to take home a 117-107 win. But
Apparently,
every
that was an awesome game because there were people on Media Row that had that pulled up on their laptop, and it just seemed like it was an awesome game.
I was watching it on my dual screen at the house. It was really nice. But this was every starter for the New York Knicks played 40 or more minutes.
Right.
The lowest was Jalen Brunson at 40. Everybody else played more than that. And obviously we talk about that being it was a regulation game. It didn't go into overtime or anything like that. But to see these guys, and obviously Tom Thibodeau is a completely different coach from Kenny Atkinson. But when you talk about the long run and being able to extend a player's not only like length into the season, but also just longevity into a career, I think that's definitely something to look for. And what Kenny Atkinson is doing with the minute allocation, I think, has been really important. But Chris, I think we need to continue with the Evan Mobley discussion. And we saw him on the All-Star fan return as the 10th vote leader when it came to the Eastern Conference front court. And I feel like we are to the point where Evan Mobley needs to be in the conversation at minimum as a reserve, which will come down to the coaches. But I feel like if he's an all-star starter or is one of the top 4 vote getters, I feel like that makes more sense than him being at the bottom of that list. And even further, like DPOY, all NBA, these are different conversations that I think we're getting to the point of needing to have when it comes to Evan Mobley.
Yeah, Evan admitted to me in the locker room tonight that one of his goals coming into this year was to make the All-Star team. And he is very aware of where he stands, being 10th in the Eastern Conference front court. Look, I think there's a truth to this whole thing when it comes to Evan, when it comes to Darius Garland. And it's the same truth that existed 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. The only way those two guys were getting to the All-Star game was via the coaches' vote. So it's going to be in the hands of the coaches to pick both of them, one of them, as a reserve. They weren't going to get enough votes as starters. We knew that coming into this thing. Donovan has a chance because Donovan is a 5-time All-Star, because Donovan is a recognizable name, because Donovan has been a perennial MVP candidate, because Donovan has been in the spotlight as one of the 15 best players in the NBA for the last 4 or 5 years. So there's like enough notoriety for somebody like Donovan that fans know him, fans are aware of him. They're certainly more aware of him than they are Darius Garland and Evan Mobley. So like we can sit here and we can talk about where Evan sits, where Darius sits, the fact that Darius isn't top 10 and Jared Allen isn't top 10. But there's like the layer of truth here that we can't ignore is that neither one of those guys were ever going to be an all-star starter. Donovan Mitchell was going to be the Cavs all-star starter, and he's probably going to be an all-star starter. And if Donovan is going to start the all-star game, Darius isn't going to start with him. They're not going to put the Cavs backcourt as the starters for the All-Star game. Not when Jalen Brunson exists, right? not when Trae Young exists, not when apparently LaMelo Ball exists. So it's going to be up to the coaches. And Darius is worthy. There's no doubt about it that Darius is worthy. And there's no doubt about it that Evan Mobley is worthy. But there's a difference between being worthy of being an all-star and being an all-star starter. I have a ballot. Am I supposed to put Evan Mobley over Karl Anthony Towns? Like, come on. Like, nobody should expect me to do that. Am I supposed to put Evan over Jason Tatum? And this is no disrespect to Evan, but there are levels to this thing. And I've been singing the praises of Evan for years. And if I could vote for reserves, like, he would be on my list for reserves. I'll make a fake ballot and he'll be one of my reserves, of course. But it's not an official one. The coaches have to pick Evan Mobley. But, like, nobody's going to pick him as a starter over Jason Tatum or Giannis or Karl Anthony Towns. Not this year, not the way that they've played, and that's not a slight on Evan, and it shouldn't be taken as a slight. Sometimes they're just guys who are more impactful, that are better players, and that's okay. If we want to sit here and say that Jordan Poole has no business being in the top 10 over Darius Garland, yeah, let's have that conversation. We can certainly have that conversation because it's asinine that Jordan Poole is 8th among fan voting among Eastern Conference guards, because there are other guys that have been better than him, that are more deserving than him. But the one thing that we know is that, and we see this on American Idol, we see this on, I'm going there, Ethan. We see this on The Voice. We see this with presidential elections and city elections and stuff like that. When you open it up to the public, in the words of LeBron James, the great LeBron James, when you open these things up to the public, you're liable to get some goofy votes. But Darius was never going to be a starter. Evan was never going to be a starter. Jared Allen was never going to be a starter. Their best chance is being a reserve. So they just have to do enough to turn the head of all these different coaches around the NBA that should have a deep understanding about how impactful Darius has been, how impactful Evan has been, and the worthiness of both guys to be all-stars.
Yeah, and that's why I think I made sure to say that I feel like Evan would be like 4th, or should be 4th in the fan voting when it comes to that. So that would leave him off a lot of ballots in all those different conversations. But I
there's
think
also another wrinkle here, and this is the first time that I can remember this being the case, Ethan. It helps Darius, it hurts Evan. Jaylen Brown of the Celtics is listed as a front court player.
Right.
In the past, he's been a guard. But this year, he's a front court player. So that's another front court guy that Evan's going to have. He's going to have to surpass in the eyes of coaches. Or maybe they're just going to take both of those guys along with, whoever else they want to take in terms of the front court. I don't think coaches will pick Paolo because of the amount of time that he's missed. I don't think coaches will pick Franz because of the amount of time that he's missed. Maybe coaches see value in Bam Adebayo and they'll give him a long look. But I've said it from the beginning, and I'm going to stick by it. I think Evan Mobley has a better chance of getting to the All-Star game than Darius Garland. There are 6 locks. Giannis, Tatum, Karl Anthony Towns, Donovan Mitchell, Jalen Brunson. Is that 6? Did I count 6? 1, 2, 3, 4. And Jaylen Brown. The 2 J's in Boston, Giannis, Karl Anthony Towns, Jalen Brunson, and Donovan are 6 locks. And then you're talking about a group of 10 to 12 players battling for the final 6 spots. And Darius and Evan are 2 of those among those 10 and 12.
And I think it's interesting because I was having conversations with people that don't necessarily cover basketball, but they use it as like a side hustle, like content creation and YouTube, and feel like they have a good understanding of the game. But I had conversations about their ballots because I don't vote. They vote because
Yeah.
they don't have to have that integrity or whatever. They can do what they want. You have an official ballot, right?
Mm. Yeah.
This is what they put for the Eastern Conference. They had Giannis, Darius, Jalen Johnson, Damian Lillard, and Karl Anthony Towns. And I asked them, and I said, "So you're putting
As
Darius
starters?
correct?" And yes, right. And I was like, "So you're putting Darius above Donovan?" And the person I was talking to was like, "Well, this is my list based on like favorites and statistics." And I was like, "But you understand that Donovan is a like more essential to the Cavs?" And he was like, "Yes." And I was like, "Okay, so why does your list not reflect that?" He was like, "Well, again, this is my favorites." And I was like, "Okay."
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get a better understanding of how the fans are voting, Chris, because it simply doesn't make sense sometimes. Like we talk
Right.
about LaMelo Ball, like he is a character. He is somebody that is in the media all the time. He does a lot of post game interviews. He's always being goofy. He's always bringing his character charisma to the stream, and I think that also plays into it. And I think when you
It
talk
definitely
about and you talked about it the other day about Evan Mobley staying behind in LA to do the NBA on NBA Today on ESPN with
Mhm.
Malika Andrews and Chiney Ogwumike, and I think that is important because he's building his social platform
Yeah.
where like we know him as this California cool dude who doesn't
Yeah.
need to do all the rah rah stuff to get his points across. He'd rather stay behind and do what he needs to do on the floor and let that speak for him. But I think that can hurt him in that same realm. Like that makes it more difficult for me to understand why Darius Garland doesn't get more notoriety because he is one of the most boisterous, personable, and just funny dudes on this team. Plus, he does a lot of post game work because he is usually leading the charge. So I
Mhm.
just think it's interesting to think about what the fan votes are like, fans that are voting are thinking about when it comes to just the
Yeah.
all around voting system. And just for clarity, 50% of the fan vote counts for the starters, 25 goes to the media, and 25 goes to current players.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well, I think I think LaMelo has a more recognizable name. Going back to the Big Baller brand and like all the different things that the family has done to put him in the spotlight for so many years. Like he was a ballyhooed recruit in high school. He took a different path than so many other guys before him, going to play overseas. Um, he gets flashy highlights on Instagram and YouTube and X, and the TikTok generation loves him. So I think those kinds of things certainly play into LaMelo being number one among guards in the Eastern Conference. Like if you remember a couple of years ago, Andrew Wiggins was like in the running for All-Star starter, and he was having a good year, but he wasn't having the year that you would expect from an All-Star starter. But he had all of Canada on his side. And then he had like the Korean pop group on his side as well that reached a certain demographic. And I think Darius can reach the same demographic that LaMelo can, but he just hasn't to this point. And I think more NBA people, as sad as this may be, more people that follow the NBA, that watch the NBA, that are just fans of the NBA, they know LaMelo Ball more than they know Darius Garland. It's just the truth.
yeah,
Especially when it comes to the people that are willing to go on social media and cast a ballot, or they're willing to go on these websites and cast a ballot, and they're willing to do like all these different things to get these players that they love watching, um, that they want to be in the all-star game. Like that demographic that uses those platforms, like yeah, Darius can reach that because of his personality. because of the flair that he plays with, because he does have shoes with New Balance and stuff like that. But I think it's going to take him time, and I think it's going to take him being in the national spotlight, playing games against Oklahoma City coming up, whether he has a deep playoff run with the Cavs where he's a big part of it and he stands out. Like, all those things are going to help him. But right now, a lot of these fans, they know LaMelo Ball. They've known him for years. They've watched him for years. They used to watch his high school games on these streaming services and stuff like that because he did some weird stuff, goofy stuff that not every player did, by just like dribbling across half court and chucking a three, or this like spellbinding pass or something along those lines. So I do think like that is a big part of the popularity of LaMelo Ball compared to Darius. It's unfortunate, but it's just something that the Cavs are going to have to fight against, and they're going to have to continue to fight against it.
Social media definitely plays a part in it, because like I look and follow different accounts like House of Highlights and Overtime, and those guys are infatuated with LaMelo Ball, because back when they were getting started, LaMelo was in Chino Hills going off and being able to like curate likes and stuff for them. So like they've given back to him by posting him sometimes more than Victor Wembanyama, LeBron James. Like, these are like actual conversations we are having. And as boisterous as Darius Garland might be around us, he doesn't have that kind of social platform. Like, not yet. And I think it's continued to grow. He's still young, but I've been on TikTok recently, and I've been seeing more and more Darius Garland edits of him playing and all those different things. And I think it's a positive trajectory to what is to come for Darius, especially if he continues to play at this level for the remainder of his career.
Yeah, I mean, I have a ballot, and what I do as a voter is I just kind of keep a running thing on either my iPhone with my iPhone notes or on a Microsoft Word document of all the different guys that I think deserve to be in the running for starter for the All-Star game. And I do the same thing when it comes to MVP and most improved and sixth man of the year and defensive player of the year, so that all those things can evolve and I can go back and I can check all of these things and whatnot. As of right now, I've got Trae Young and Donovan Mitchell. Like, to me, those have been the two best guards in the Eastern Conference. A few people expected Atlanta to be this year, especially after they broke up DeJounte and Trae. But Trae has flourished, and he's been great for the Hawks. And I think he's worthy of it. So my ballot is Donovan and Trae in the backcourt. And then the front court, I think, is as straightforward as it gets. Giannis, Tatum, and Karl-Anthony Towns.
And I don't think anybody can argue with you on that.
But it's only January 4th, and these things are fluid, and things can change, and injuries can happen, and shooting slumps can happen, and losing streaks for a team can happen. Maybe not for the Cavs. It doesn't seem like that's possible, given at the high level that they're playing at. But for some of these other teams that are a little bit more human than the Cavs at this point.
Yeah, and I'm trying to look it up as we discuss this, but I believe fan voting for the NBA All-Star Game ends on January
the 20th.
So that makes sense, and then it'll be announced 3 days later on TNT, I believe. So yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, it's not like this is a decision, as you mentioned, that is going to happen now. But you look at the Cavs schedule and who they have coming up, and I feel like we'll have a different podcast for that, dissecting what the Cavs record could actually look like as they continue this historic pace. But when you talk about where this Cavs team is going, and the next two games against the West Coast are both against Oklahoma City, it's primetime television for a team that is on a historic run for their franchise. So I definitely think it's something that everybody is excited for and has circled on their calendar. That might just be why ESPN bumped it up to be on their platform, Chris. But with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs Insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. This is where you can sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy. But we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.